Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Karim Sirajuddin here for another session on Islamic psychological spiritual counseling brought to you by About Islam. Thank you for having me, About Islam, and thank you to all in attendance. Just quickly want to check to make sure everyone can hear me and see me. All right. So we're going to jump right into a question that was asked. And inshallah, my response to that question will lead me to today's topic, which is continuing to understand the human condition according to Islamic psychological paradigm. And the question that I wanted to read, first and foremost. So a sister submitted, Assalamu alaikum. I have a question concerning my brother. He has all of the signs of schizophrenia disorder, but he refuses to get help. Also, he has very strange beliefs about who God is. He doesn't believe in Allah and he refuses to pray. It is very difficult for us to talk to him. He does not respond most of the time. We were both born into a Muslim family, but our family was not religious when we were growing up. I recently started practicing Islam and I don't know much, and I'm still learning. I wanted to know what Islam says about mental illness because I see a lot of information about Jinn possessions and the signs and symptoms are very similar. Can you please explain to me how mental illness is seen in Islam and how will Allah punish mentally ill people for sinning if they are not mentally able to connect with Allah and understand the consequences? Thank you very much. Okay, that's a great question and there's a lot of things to unpack. So first and foremost, when we say, what does Islam say? Well, Islam is not a person that we can call and ask directly. So what we mean by what does Islam say is what does the tradition of Islam and its teachings say about it? In other words, how do the teachings, principles, and values of Islam give us guidance or explicit knowledge on the matter? It's like asking, what does Islam say about oil changes for your car or brain surgery? Islam as a tradition guides us to do a couple of things. One is to always seek knowledge, to ask those who know when we don't know, and that doing good is a priority as human beings. So based on these themes, naturally, any type of scientific or medical or engineering pursuits or what have you that helps improve human society and well-being is considered an Islamic principle, right? So so when we say what does Islam say, this is really what we mean, right? What guidance do we have around the religion? But specifically, mental illness is real, just like biological illness is real. There's no Muslim in their right mind who's ever going to say there's no such thing as cancer or headaches or having the flu. This would be contrary to objective reality. And similarly, mental illness is also a real thing, because if you think about the basic idea that any system in the human being functions according to rules and order, right? So you have billions of cells that make up the body and the organs in your body, and constantly these cells are like little factories. They're doing all kinds of little jobs and work just to allow your organs to function. And if your organs are functioning properly, it allows your body to function properly. So anytime there is a system, there can be a possibility of malfunction, right, or damage. And similarly, we have a brain and we have a heart. And the spirit is something that we know exists in the human condition, and spirituality has its own system as well as psychology. So mental illness is of course a real thing. There are people that are created with different physiological conditions which can impact their psychology. Sometimes people go through experiences which change their mental architecture. And so mental illness is a real thing, and the Quran is full of notions of human development It discusses the intellect, it discusses the heart, beliefs, actions. So this is how Islam is a type of psychology as well, because it's the study of the self. So the first point of your question, sister, is mental illness is a real thing, and a conscious Muslim recognizes that just like there are medical conditions that we have to examine and treat, there can be, in some cases, mental illnesses that have to be examined and treated. Now, the next thing is that as Muslims, we understand that psychology and spirituality are like two sides of the same coin, because psychology is essentially how our minds work and what we do to behave. But psychology is this idea of studying the self and even studying the soul. In classical Greek, this is what psyche means. So as Muslims, studying our spirituality and psychology is like studying, two concentric circles. They're connected and they feed off of each other, because naturally the way you think, the way you feel, the way you interpret reality, and the way you behave is a state of your consciousness and your nafs, of yourself. So these are clearly connected, and because Islam is about developing human beings and spirituality, it's naturally going to be about developing psychology as well. Now, a couple of things we have to consider based on your brother's case, all right? So first of all, some issues that a person experiences, we can say it goes under the category of what we call psychospiritual illnesses. So these are things that impact your spirituality, your heart, as well as your mind and the way you think. So for example, diseases of the heart, things like arrogance or miserliness or narcissism, these are issues that are both psychological and spiritual, because they are connected, obviously. The only way you're alive and thinking and feeling is because of the spirit that's in your body. So your consciousness is composed of these elements, and naturally all of it is working together. Things like anxiety and depression could also be connected to a psychospiritual illness rather than something more neurological or biological, right? So sometimes things are psychospiritual in nature, and sometimes they are more psychobiological. And that means that sometimes our anxiety or our depression or other disorders are actually because of some biochemical process or dysfunction in the body. And so these cases require not only therapeutic treatment, but they also may require pharmaceutical or anatomical treatment as well. Now, in the case of your brother, first of all, if you and your brother did not grow up in a family that was very religious, the first thing that comes up for me is it's possible that your brother simply just does not have, he's not convinced yet that this is something to believe in, Islam and who is Allah, and how maybe to the level that he's learned, he's not quite convinced about it, or he doesn't feel like it's something that brings value to his life. So since both of you and your family are still on the journey of learning, this could be part of the reason why your brother is not very practicing right now or unable to really connect. You also mentioned that he has signs of schizophrenia. Well, again, this is something that has to be officially diagnosed, and I would recommend, more than one opinion. We can't just go online and read about symptoms and then assume or assign something as severe as schizophrenia to a person, because there could be other, explanations for something like that. So, for instance, and you also asked about this idea of Jinn possession. Okay, so let's get into that a bit. So the difference here is that, like I said, there's psychospiritual illness, psychobiological illness, and Jinn would fall under the category of perhaps what we would call paranormal illness. Now, what's interesting about Jinn possession, or influences of strong Jinni forces on a person, is that the symptoms of a Jinn possessing a human being, there can be some symptoms that are shared by mental illness disorders or even biological illnesses and disorders. So that is why it's not that simple to just say, okay, maybe it's just a Jinn. For example, some of the signs of a person having Jinn, or in some cases, is a person could, let's say, vomit a lot or feel a lot of fatigue and fog in their mind. They could have pain in their bodies. They could feel difficulty sleeping, sweating a lot. They could have changes in their skin tone, an inability to understand language, or have all this mental confusion. These are all things that sometimes are found in a person who is possessed with jinn. But also, a person who has, let's say, cerebral malaria, they're also going to experience a lot of these symptoms, fatigue and fever and nausea and mental confusion and inability to walk and all these things. That's also something you'll find with somebody who has cerebral malaria or a brain tumor. A brain tumor could also cause, all kinds of impulsive and aggressive behaviors, because there could be a part of the brain that's under inflammation or compression or being damaged because of the tumor. So it's naturally going to take away from the person's ability to function and have their typical behavioral patterns, right? So in order for you to really understand if it's a jinn possession or not, you have to first go do full medical evaluations, because sometimes it's a different type of biological disease. And sometimes it's more of a psychospiritual illness where a person just doesn't have the right understanding or healthy way of thinking or knowledge to cope with certain anxiety or stress in their lives. And this could also result in a person, not wanting to pray or not being very motivated by Islam. So to answer your question, sister, you have to go and see if your brother can get medical and psychiatric evaluations first and foremost. Only then, after that, and everything is clear, you could consider, is this something maybe more paranormal or of a jinni nature? And if so, then that requires also experts in that field to come and evaluate. And these are people who, let's say, they know how to do exorcisms or read Quran, ruqya, on people. And sometimes there are unique symptoms to a jinn possession that you don't find in biological or psychospiritual illnesses. So those are things that an expert can inshallah show you the truth of the matter when it comes to that. So I hope that answers your question, sister. But I think first and foremost, if he's not willing to go get medical diagnosis or anything like that, then for now, just focus on you learning more about the deen, trying to live it and be the best example you can, and try to involve your brother to learn with you along the way. And if he's not interested, then give him some time. Everyone works in their own timeline. Okay, so I'm also seeing a question here from a sister that is saying she's in a psychiatric ward right now, and how do I get the doctors to believe I'm not sick and that it's jinn watching me and following me? I hear voices and see red eyes following me. They tell me to kill people and myself. Okay, well, this is very serious, and I'm sorry to hear that, Sister Leah. This is a difficult time. But if you're in a psychiatric ward, are they doing evaluations, and have they given you any prescription medicine? And if so, have you noticed these symptoms reducing? For example, hearing the voices and hearing these types of inclinations to hurt people, or these red eyes, because that could be connected to a mental disorder as well. I mean, schizophrenics do hallucinate. They hear things that aren't there and they see things that aren't there. So if you are still seeing these things and you are under medication that's supposed to remove this, you have to find out how long you have to be on this medication, because sometimes medication takes time to kick in and work for the person depending on the individual's chemistry. If you have been on the medication for a long time, Okay, so you're saying you are on antipsychotics, but they don't really work. So is there anybody else in your community or family or friends that can maybe bring a person who is an expert in working with jinn or doing ruqya to the facility that you are to try that? Because it's possible that if you are under medication and this stuff is still continuing, there may be something paranormal there, but I can't say for sure. So the question is do you have access to people outside of the facility that you're in? And are you allowed to have visitors who can also help? Why or why not? And until she gets back to me, I wanted to talk a little bit more about this idea of jinn and how it plays a role here. So first and foremost, we know that the jinn exist. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us this in the Quran in several occasions. We find it in the Sunnah. And we also know that they can whisper and play a role in our psychology. Now, again, from my understanding and observation, it does happen where you have a strong shaitanic presence or jinni presence in some cases, but most of the time it is a medical and biological issue. So we have to take those proper steps to fully evaluate before we make any conclusions. Now, generally speaking, the jinn can only whisper or give you suggestions to do things, but they don't have the power to make you do anything unless there is a severe case of possession, right? And when there's a severe case of possession, it can influence you to such a degree that at times a person feels like they are watching themselves do things that isn't fully in their control or their power. And this is a very scary thing to experience, but it is not as common as maybe sometimes we like to consider. And I'm not trying to discount what anybody is claiming here today. I'm just talking about, generally speaking, we have to recognize that we don't always want to assume that it's something paranormal until we've done full medical and clinical evaluations. Okay, Sister Leah responded. I have an Islamic scholar called Khola Hassan. I can try to get them to visit me. Yeah, I think you should, sister, because if you are in the medication and you're in the psychiatric ward and you don't feel like it's changing the symptoms, then, see if you can have a scholar come visit and do the tests that they need to assess whether or not you need a ruqya treatment as well. And maybe you need both, because psychiatric treatment can help stabilize you to a degree while you're getting the ruqya treatment. That's possible. But again, it is kind of a complex thing which I can't fully evaluate or discuss here. I'm also not an expert in psychiatry or in exorcisms. So inshallah, you can connect with that person so that they can come and help you. And going back to the topic of today's discussion, understanding the difference between shaitanic whispers and the nafsi whispers or egoic whispers. And here is one tip. And this is, a general rule. It may not be the case for everybody, but generally this is what I've learned from the scholars and what I've observed myself is whispers from the shaitan seem like they are, it's like somebody asking or telling you to do something. So you get this inclination in kind of the second person, like, Karim, why don't you go and do this thing, which is haram? Or haven't you done this in a long time? Why don't you go and do this haram thing? So it's kind of like somebody, like a evil friend who's trying to advise you or call you to do something evil. But that does not mean that a person is now forced to do it, because in the Quran, on the Day of Judgment, Shaitan actually says, Iblis says, when people try to blame him for their evil deeds, he says, all I did was whisper to you, and you're the one that chose to do it. Don't blame me. Today I fear Allah. In other words, he never puts a gun to our head. He simply gives us ideas that are evil or destructive to ourselves and others, and we now have the opportunity to choose whether or not we're going to do that. This is why the Prophet ﷺ taught us to say "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim," or to remember Allah in those moments, because when you do this, you repel that dark energy from your psyche, and you're able to, get back to your clear sense. Now, the difference between that and a nafsi, or personal or egoic whisper, is that the shaitanic whisper just comes and it inserts and then it goes away. It's not perpetual. Whereas the nafs is something that is more perpetual. It's something that you say over and over again to yourself. And usually, when you're talking to yourself or it's coming from the nafs, you tend to maybe use more first-person stuff, like, oh, I want to go steal, or I want to go watch pornography, or I want to yell at my wife for what they just did. Sometimes that's really about the nafs. The shaitanic energy would say something like, who does your wife think she is? She can't talk to you that way. You go put her in her place and you go yell at her. So it's like somebody telling you what to do, versus the nafsi inclination or whisper it's something you feel compelled to do within yourself, and it tends to repeat. Now, how this works in the Islamic psychological paradigm is, if you consider, a pure person who has no good deeds or bad deeds, right? Just think about a pure person. The pure person has now fitra, which is a natural good disposition of themselves. And with the right guidance and common sense, they are naturally going to be inclined to do good and follow the principles of the divine. What the shaitan does now is it comes and it tries to infiltrate this pure state and plants evil seeds. Every time we respond to those evil seeds and we water them through our actions and choosing to do what we were, what we heard or what we thought about that's negative, we do this more and more and more over time, that an evil seed that was planted by the shaitanic energy now becomes a part of our inner garden. It becomes a part of us. So for example, if shaitan comes to a young individual and suggests to them to start smoking like their friends at the playground, and they've never smoked before, and they say, try it, you should try it, you're going to be cool, and your friends will think you're cool, and you'll be more included, and then you start smoking and you don't like it, and you say, I'm not doing that again. The next day at the playground, he comes and gives you the same whisper. Why don't you try smoking again? Just because it was bad yesterday doesn't mean it won't be a little better today. And then before you know it, you're addicted to smoking. So now the person who's addicted to smoking, the shaitan is not going to come and whisper to you anymore about have a cigarette, because now you are addicted, and it's now imprinted in your nafs to get up every day and decide to smoke by yourself. In fact, you may smoke a lot during the day. This isn't something that the shaitan necessarily will whisper to you about anymore, because now it's like a running wheel that has been internalized by the person. Now this becomes a whisper or an inclination of the nafs, right? So now shaitan has that down. He's like, okay, this person's a smoker. I don't need to bother them about that. But now I'm going to come at them with different angles. How can I also corrupt and destroy them in different ways? Now I'm going to focus on how they should try marijuana next, or how they should run away from home, or whatever. You see? So why do we have this idea of purification of the heart in Islam? Is because there are certain things we as individuals may take on from those evil influences, or even our own decisions, and now they've become a part of us. And in order for them not to become a part of us, we have to purify our hearts and clean and polish the state of our souls through tawbah, returning to God and asking forgiveness, through seeking knowledge, understanding why this is evil and why it has consequences, and accepting the consequences and how it's impacted our life in negative ways. And we have to also seek support from those who know. So if you can't quit smoking by yourself, what should you do? You should join a program where people like you want to quit smoking. They have support systems. There's a science to getting rid of an addiction. There are step-by-step action items and things that you have to learn and practice in order for you to get rid of a habit like this. Similarly, in Islam, when you have diseases or stains on your heart, or your soul has some pollution, you have to clean up that inner environment through the things that Islam has taught us, right? So doing adhkar of Allah, making sure you do your prayers on time, making sure you're consciously present in your prayer, learning the meaning of the Quran that you recite, doing other good deeds like serving others so that you can start to break this selfishness that often leads us to keep doing more for ourselves, even if it's dangerous, just because we've become very self-absorbed or egocentric over time. So this is, inshallah, hopefully helps everyone understand more clearly the difference between shaitanic whisper and how it can eventually become a nafsi whisper, and why the idea of purification of the heart and the self is embedded in our tradition. So I'm going to wrap up there, inshallah, and see if there are any last questions or comments before we end today. All right. Yes, Sister Leah, I see your comment here, your last comment, and I really hope you get the help that you need. Please try your best to get people from the outside to help you, whether it's friends, family, or local imams. I think it's important for them to come and try to be present at the facility that you are, and maybe spend some time with you there and see if they're allowed to also discuss or consult with the psychiatrist at your facility. Perhaps they might be open to, some alternative treatments. I have read articles about this before where, let's say you have, priests who consult psychiatrists when it comes to situations where they believe there could be demonic possession. And sometimes there is a collaborative effort there. So I don't know if that's possible in your locale, but it certainly is something you should try, because if you've been on the psychiatric treatment and these symptoms are very dangerous and scary, they're not going away, inshallah, you will get the help that you need. Thank you all for your patience and your presence, and inshallah, we will see you next time on more tips and understanding around Islamic spiritual psychology. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وأزواجه وسلم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.